within the top of the hour. I would like to go into the manufacturing process as well as a little bit into approval and clinical trial setting. You may have received in the pre-read a description about the manufacturing process. It is currently manufactured in CHO cells and with 300-liter batches. And you already mentioned it's available in 2 types of IV formulation. Would you expecting any difficulties in scaling up the manufacturing? And if you are not familiar with antibody manufacturing, I appreciate that you may not be able to answer that.
I think I can answer that. CHO cells are very, very widely available, Chinese hamster ovary, and they're a extremely stable cell type. So I think that is good because you're not dependent on an unusual cell type. And if you're able to, this is something that you're not dependent on having to make them in animals, for instance. So that's good that you're able to express this through phage displays and through the CHO cell. And having a lyophilized powder and liquid formulations are both useful. Either would be fine. Lyophilized powders are very common, then you just have to reconstitute. But if you already have a liquid formulation, the chances of making errors in reconstitution are lower. I think ramping up production from this, it sounds like it should be very easy to do.
Now, I would like to turn to the clinical setting and taking into account the difficulties or perceived, on my side, perceived difficulties of disease diagnosis. How or would you foresee any difficulties in conducting a pivotal study in the indication of AMR?
Because the disease occurs a little bit later after the transplant, so most transplant trials enroll subjects who are about to get an organ transplant. You have a very defined time point of starting, and events that are early in that period are easier than to design trials for, because then you know that within a year of follow-up you'll have so many events. Here, I could see the trial being improved in its design by using one of 2 characteristics. One is to try to specifically design the trial for the people who are at high risk for antibody-mediated rejection. So the ones who are receiving, for instance, a second transplant, where they have already achieved some degree of panel-reactive antibody sensitization, or people who are high PRAs, even without a prior transplant because they had blood transfusions or pregnancy or other things. So high PRA people are more likely to develop AMR, and I think that would be a focus area to try to not take the low immunologic risk patients, but the high immunologic risk patients, including the ones who are being transplanted across ABO compatible blood groups. So those, I think, would be one way. And that would then be patients who are newly transplanted. But you could also design it as a trial that patients who develop antibody-mediated rejection at any time post-transplant might be eligible. And then you are not restricted to the new transplants. And then bigger programs which do a lot of organ transplants. Kidneys generally tend to be the organ most transplanted at most centers. So if you were doing this, I think you would probably start with kidney. Most of the trials in transplantation typically start with kidney. And there you would use this agent for anybody who meets the criteria for AMR. That, I think, would be the design I would recommend for the first trial. The issue of trying to do this for people who have antibodies but do not have organ dysfunction, I think that would be less desirable, because then how do you judge the response? It would just be on reduction of antibodies.